Okay, we are live.
Yeah.
With Aaron doing, what are we going to do, Aaron? Something about Google.
We're going to look at the provider GCP authentication story for GKE clusters in Google Cloud coming from the cross-plane provider. Making it work with versions of GKE above 1.19, where they turned off the basic authentication.
So you want to give a short background story? What was happening before the provider?
Absolutely. So if you were to go look at the cross-plane platform ref for GCP, where we demo how we make, we demo compositions and we demo the deployment of clusters on Google Cloud, you'll note that there's a note in here that we're using the master authentication mechanism. That just means it's a basic username and password. And we're doing that because those are easy to store in a secret, and because the Cube client that crossplane is relying upon, the Go client library, easily, if we give you the username and password, it'll do the Cube config parsing correctly. It'll authenticate to the cluster. It's a very short, easy path. However, that means that we cannot launch a GKE cluster from crossplane and interact with it using a cluster version above 1.18. Because in 1.19, they completely shut down this basic authentication mechanism. So if we want to go above 1.18, we've got a choice. We either need to do certs, which I asked around and nobody likes, or we need to figure out how we're going to use a service account OAuth flow in order to create a service account and basically be able to continue launching a cluster and then putting our applications on that cluster, all from a control plane using crossplane. So
what did you? A quick note. This was correct me if I'm wrong, right? This was a result of a hack week that we had a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And so, this is what you hacked, right?
It's a bad word, right? This is a complete failure to do what I wanted to do during Hack Week, which was to solve a lot more problems related to compositions and the upbound internal infrastructure. And I wanted to get a lot more headway on just our internal deployment story. Instead, I hit this wall. I could not launch a cluster from crossplane and then get compositions deployed to it. So I wound up spending all of the last upbound Hack Week diving into Cube authentication, the GCP OAuth flow, the GCP OAuth plugin that already is available in Cube, in the Cube client. And I came out with this, which quite frankly was a big blocker for us. So I'm really happy with it. I'm really excited. I currently implemented this in Provider-Helm because that's what I was using in order to deploy applications. But we're talking about this actually might belong in the cross-plane controller runtime, because there's a large number of providers that are not Helm that will need to be able to parse Cube configs in this way and need to be able to interact with a Cube with an OAuth enabled Kubernetes cluster in a cloud of one kind or another. So if we could get these ported over into crossplane and runtime, I think that would be another big win, because then they could just be leveraged natively by anything that needs to deploy into any of these cloud providers.
Okay, are you going to demo it?
I am going to demo it.
I get nervous if we talk for too long.
No, I want to demo. I want to show this off. So this is we'll get to this. This is the client Go GCP tool. But to give a little bit of background, so this is available at if you go over to the crossplane contrib Provider-Helm and you look at it, there is currently a draft PR for anyone who wants to take a look and just follow along with what we're doing. Then what I have over here is I have launched Argo CD on a local cluster on my a kind cluster running on my local, and I've got crossplane in there with this new version of the Provider-Helm and a couple of compositions and packages. So I am going to go ahead and bring up, where did I put I'm going to go ahead and point this at my repo, which is, I've already got a project ID and a repo set up for it. No, that's the wrong one. Already it's gone wrong.
Let me stop you for a second, Aaron.
Yes.
Can you go back to Visual Studio Code?
Yes.
And then press Command plus a couple of times. For
So
people older than 25.
Let me see if I can get this. I'm not going to be spending a great deal of time in here,
okay.
But here I can get. So what we're doing in here is, this is just my Argo application for the live stream. I'm going to point directly to the on-cluster Kubernetes service, and I'm pointing it to an internal repo that's holding my compositions and my applications. So from there, I can save this, and I can create the app in Argo. And now we've got a good, I like using Argo for these demos because it gives me something really nice and visual rather than working from the command line, and we can see the relationship. So the first thing I'm going to do this step by step rather than all at once, just to confirm as we're going through. But the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that my provider config is in place so that I can start talking to my Google Cloud account. And then I'm going to go ahead and launch my network claim. I have a custom network composition and a claim object. And we want to get these out and running so that my node pool has somewhere to live. And we can watch this show up in here. So there it is, Hack Week Infra Network. Let me get this up, and there we go. So there's my Hack Week cluster, or my Hack Week network running. And now, since I have that, I can go ahead and launch my Kubernetes cluster claim. So I have installed a composition that gives me a Kubernetes cluster resource. It's very similar to a persistent volume claim. I can now issue claims on it. So I could ask for multiple copies of the exact same Kubernetes configuration to be stamped out. They get custom names. They get, I called this one Hack Week GKE, but they'll get a suffix, and I can keep, stamping them. This is kind of the whole cross-plane thing. The ability to, like, I as an SRE or a platform engineer can put the cluster definition out there, and anybody who needs a cluster can request one for their own purposes in their own namespace and so on. So this'll take a little bit because the cluster is going to have to provision on Google Cloud. We can see it coming up. I want to point out what we did here as part of this composition is we did create a service account on GKE. That is the service account that we want to use to authenticate to our cluster. We created a service account key. This is supported already in Provider GCP. We can say, here's my service account, and then reference that service account in an object, get a key for it. And then we are storing that key as a secret on the cluster. So what we needed to do was extend the provider config for Provider-Helm. Normally, we simply add in these credentials. It will already generate a kube config that's already built in. What we had to do was also provide this Google App Creds block where we're going to reference the private key. It's got this dynamic name because we're generating it on the fly. Like, the biggest thing I want to stress for the demo, the key, the user, none of that existed before we came in here and started creating stuff. It's all brand new. And what we're going to do when we start the authentication flow is we're going to use this private key to make a request to Google to get a new token. And from that token, we can start refreshing our authentication and just feed it into the normal kube config. So the kube config does not change at all. We just change how we're generating the secret instead of how we're doing the actual auth token portion of the event. And I can get into that in a second.
Is it a temporary token, right? It's not a
this is
one. I cannot use it to get my kube config or anything like that to use myself in a laptop and stuff like that. It's just for cross-plane temporary, right?
I believe that is correct. If you had access to the secret to that secret, you might be able to pull it down onto your laptop and use it for however long the session is set for. But I think eventually you would hit a wall where you would need the actual service account key in order to regenerate the token once that token expired. So they're short-lived credentials, which really helps out security. You don't have a long-lived username and password just sitting on the cluster forever. That's hard-coded into the cluster configuration. This is the provider config. That's what we were just looking at. So while this is coming up, I need to reduce this a little bit. The biggest thing that I wanted to show here was what we learned as we were going through this process, what we learned and what we found. Oh, good, we have a node. Yay. So here we go. We have nodes. There is one portion of this that I need to do out of band, and that is currently Provider GCP does not support, we don't currently support altering organization level permissions. So we have created the service account, but in order for it to actually have administrative control of the GKE cluster, we need to assign it a permission that's at the organization level. So I'm going to do that behind the scenes here very quickly. All we're doing is pulling up the service account in IAM and granting it usage on the Cube cluster engine admin role. So for that, we go to Argo, we pull up this name, and in my organization administration, I can find that, and I can give it Kubernetes engine admin, and we're all set. That's actually something that will need a story around it, because obviously you don't want somebody to be able to create a service account that can promote itself to that kind of permission. You need to control that from the organization side. So your organization roles and so on would need to be managed or somewhat accessible to Crossplane. Otherwise, you would just create a group and the SA could add itself to the group, I believe. So now that we have that, we're going to look at this apps claim object. This is basically just a composition holding several Helm provider releases. And at the moment, I'm just doing some standard kind of tooling for the cluster. I've got an ingress Nginx operator, I've got Vault, I've got Cert Manager, I've got a chart museum. Just some basic, I'm not even providing, it's all going to be default configuration. I'm not providing anything extraordinary. But I can just go in here and I can sync it and watch as the world gets populated. So here's the release. This one, I think, is the chart museum. There we go. This one is the ingress. And if we were to pop over into the actual cluster and we look at our workloads, and I've been launching clusters all day, so we'll have to make sure we're in the right one. Here we go. These are our cluster, these are our node apps, or these are our apps coming up on the nodes. Brand new cluster, brand new kube config, everything self-contained within the composition. I also, when I did this for the company demo, I basically called it the world's most boring demo, because I didn't provision any actual site or service on here yet. I didn't even enable, I didn't set up the ingress for Chart Museum or so on. All we're going to get is an external load balancer that's going to go to the default ingress Nginx container. But that was it. So it's a little bit of a letdown, I think, because what did we do? We did exactly what you want Crossplane to do. We turned on a cluster and we were able to authenticate it, and we were able to put apps on that cluster, all from the composition. All of this is a change to the internals of how Cube is doing this and extending the ability, or how Crossplane is doing this and extending the provider so that we can actually get a more sophisticated security mechanism. So I did not know when I started this project, did not know what an AuthProvider was, didn't have any idea how big a can of worms I was opening up. I am a site reliability engineer for Upbound. I'm normally dealing with Helm charts, cluster configuration. I got a lot of experience in different config, but I love Crossplane. I love this idea that rather than having to even just this idea that I no longer have to wake up an engineer to go run my config management system to bring things back to the known state, just have a daemon, have a control plane continuously running. I'm like an unapologetic Crossplane fanboy. Because I'm an unapologetic Kubernetes fanboy. The second I saw Crossplane, I said, this is the Kubernetes way to do infrastructure. This is what I want to be doing. So what I want to show here is, if we go, while I was hacking on this, and this is really a hack, where I am now is I'm literally looking at the client Go Kubernetes library that is just published by Google. And underneath plugin package client auth, there are several auth providers for Azure. There's a generic OIDC. I think I spent a whole day trying to make the generic OIDC what I wanted. There's an OpenStack one. I'm pretty sure the AWS solution relies on OIDC. But I found my way down here to the client auth GCP plugin. And when you're reading through this, what I was trying to figure out is, how do I pass to this plugin my service account credentials? Because by default, this plugin only ever wants to find your credentials on your local machine. So it does that. It will accept an environment variable for you to tell it a new path, but it will not accept you just passing in the actual credentials through the environment. So this is the library that actually says, did I get an environment variable for a new credentials file? If not, is the credentials file in its known location? If not, do I have a metadata server? Can I call out to something inside Google Cloud? This is the code that's doing that. And it all comes down to this, the default token source. That call is the flow that's searching everywhere for known credentials. But it's assuming I'm on a laptop. It's assuming that I am a person that has configured my workstation, and this is where it wants to find this. It wants a shell. It wants to talk out to some kind of other provider. What we had to do was we had to go in here and figure out how to break into this and pass it the actual credentials rather than just a place to find the credentials. And so that was what I wound up doing. I basically pulled the code as is, and instead of doing the default token provider, I was able to just use a new cached token source using the provider config that we had extended to include a service account. So by doing this now, Provider-Helm understands that its token source, where it's going to get that first part of the OAuth handshake, is based on these credentials rather than finding those credentials somewhere in your path. So that was the fun part. And here we go. Did I get my load balancer yet? There we go. And there. As I said, it is the world's most boring demo. I don't have it. I didn't put an ingress for any of the other services. So what you get is a 404 page served from the cluster, demonstrating that we've successfully got traffic going from the public to a pod, all from a cross-plane deployment using Oauth.
So you're essentially saying that you did all this work, and this is not trivial. But it wasn't. It was too complicated for you to write 3 lines of Go code that says "Hello World." That's what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Don't get me started on the Hello World provider. I still want a Hello World provider. So that'll be the next hack week. Is just a provider that you just say Hello World in, and once we have that, it'll be very fun.
So can you give us? Can you paste a link to the repo?
Yeah,
I can put it on a screen then.
Absolutely. To the PR for, here we go.
Yeah.
Or did you want the? There we go.
Yeah, I mean, whatever is the information somebody might want to follow. Thank you.
Absolutely. So this is now in draft status, pending me cleaning up the code a little bit and again, solving that question of, is this really the right place for this, or is this something that we would rather implement in the runtime and then allow Provider-Helm and any other? We have a lot of there's a lot of providers coming down now that are all going to be based on kubeconfig. There is a provider Kubernetes that was also part of Hack Week, which I'm very excited about. I think I know I have not used it yet, but I've heard of Provider Argo, which would also need a kubeconfig. So all of these could benefit from this kind of flow. So if we put it in the runtime and make it available as that, it simplifies the story across all the other code bases.
So what you're saying is that after this session, you're going to close that pull request without merging and move it to somewhere else.
I mean, when you say after this session, I'm talking like in 3 weeks. It'll still be there available for people to look at. I will reference it in every other pull request though. So you'll be able to follow the story through.
Yeah, nice.
I also need to learn how to write tests. That's something I have not yet done. I've not learned how to test this particular piece of code. So.
I liked you until this moment.
I didn't say I don't want tests. I said I do not know how to write them.
Still.
I know.
You lost the point.
It's SRE time. Meet the SRE. So Very cool. Other than that, as I said, I'm happy to talk more about it, or to talk more about just the overall joy and wonder that is Crossplane. But it was a pretty fun project. I stayed up late for 2 nights on it, having a great time learning. And that's all I got. Victor, what do you got?
That's all. I mean, we did not define how long this session will be, so it is as long as we want to.
It will be however long. Do we have anybody that's asking questions yet, or anybody who wants things?
Give it a minute for questions, and if no questions come, then I'm going to shut you down, Aaron.
All right, sounds good to me. If we don't get questions, then next time I will have to actually include a hello world, and that will bring them.
So, when you don't get questions, that can mean one of the two things. Either everything was crystal clear and there is nothing that you didn't say that anybody might be wondering, or it was so boring that nobody followed. It's one of the two things. I go for the former, though.
I would be shocked to find out that talking about the deep internals of AuthProviders inside of the client Go library of Kubernetes was considered boring by anybody. I think that that's a ridiculous statement on its face. I was genuinely hoping like tons of Oauth geeks would show up and just complain endlessly about how many security holes I might be opening up.
It's it's a problem I created when I tweeted about it. I never put I did not investigate what are the hashtags that Oauth geeks are using. So
we'll have to go look that up. That's all right. This is my first time ever doing something like this. So it's a good first experience.
Okay, then. Thank you, Aaron, for sharing this. And what did you say? By next week, you will do the same thing for other providers.
My hope is that, I don't know that I'm promising next week, but my hope is that we get this into a place where it's just going to be invisible to the community and everything will work like magic and no one will ever know this ever happened.
Brilliant. Thank you,
awesome.
Aaron.
Victor, thank you. It's fun hanging out with you.